Every WWE newcomer wants to get their debut just right, as you only get one chance to make a good first impression. So important is this, in fact, when it goes well, it's often been the highlight of a calendar year. But just who had the best debut for each year of the 21st century? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with 2000 and the arrival of Taz. Yes, it was at that year's Royal Rumble where, in front of a raucous Madison Square Garden crowd, the human suplex machine first appeared in WWF after weeks of teasing. Obviously then, this was a big deal, not just because Taz had a reputation for being one of the toughest guys in the industry back then, but also because he was a native of Brooklyn. So as you would expect, he was treated like a hero here as he completely dismantled Kurt Angle in short order. Sure, things wouldn't go so well after that, but nothing can ever take away from the great introduction the ECW star had on night one. And he wouldn't be the only ECW alumni who'd be making a big WWE debut around this time, as in 2001, the same thing would be happening with our next subject, Rob Van Dam. Of course, in Rob Van Dam's case, however, this wasn't him jumping from ECW to WWF, as by that point the former company had already gone out of business. So, with no job to go to anymore, it made all the sense in the world that Mr. Monday Night would find a new home on Raw. Hell, so much would he be instantly taken to by fans here on account of his innovative in-ring offense and laid-back character, he'd become one of the only highlights of the infamous Invasion angle. That's right, aside from Booker T, RVD would really be the only guy who came out of this storyline looking good. And that makes him an easy choice for the best WWF debut of 2001 as far as we're concerned. But what about 2002? Well, when it comes to that year, the best could only be John Cena. Why is that? Well, because over the next couple of decades, John Cena would go on to become the face of the company itself, with him being easily the biggest star Vince McMahon had produced since the exits of both Steve Austin and The Rock. Sure, his first few months weren't his high watermark, as even if he did stand out during his first night going up against Kurt Angle, he'd quickly find himself falling back down the card as he struggled to develop a character. But that wasn't a big deal in the long run. No, once he morphed into the Doctor of Thugonomics, it was full steam ahead for Big Match John. And the reality of the situation is that he'd never have gotten to this point if it wasn't for his initial arrival on an episode of SmackDown, where he proclaimed that he had exactly the level of ruthless aggression his boss was looking for. Would the best debut of 2003 have that same level of ruthless aggression, however? Well, let's find out as we look at him next. The one, the only, Goldberg. Yes, it might have taken a while longer than expected, but by 2003, WWE had managed to convince Bill Goldberg to sign on the dotted line, with this meaning that for the first time in his career, he'd be a WWE superstar. And the impact he was intent on making in the company was evident on night one, as it was here that he went right after the biggest fish in the pond by challenging The Rock. What happened after that? Well, while he would end up beating the Great One, and would become World Heavyweight Champion before the year was over, there was a general sense that his run could have been a lot stronger if he'd been booked better overall. But again, like with Taz, none of that can take away from how successful he was on night one. So now that we've covered that, let's look to 2004 instead, the year when the best WWE debut was none other than Carlito. Sure, Carlito might not have come into WWE with the same level of fanfare that someone like a Bill Goldberg had, mostly because he was still a rookie here, but that didn't mean he wasn't dead set on impressing right away. And this was something he did because in his very first match on the SmackDown brand, he pinned John Cena to become the new United States Champion. Needless to say then, this was a shocking moment and one which immediately put the Puerto Rican on the map. Honestly, at that point in time, it wouldn't have been unreasonable to look at Carlito and see a future world champion, so strong did he look in his debut. And he wouldn't be the only person who'd be debuting around this time that would look very strong early on, as the exact same thing could be said about our entry for 2005, Bobby Lashley. But then, to be fair, it would have been very difficult to make Lashley look weak, as his physique upon arrival in WWE could be politely described as that which would exist for the love child of Brock Lesnar and Scott Steiner. Come on now, even in the world of WWE, it was rare to see someone quite as jacked as he was back then. And that made Vince McMahon immediately want to go all the way with his newest signing, with him spending the entire year undefeated in singles action. No, this wouldn't be the peak of Lashley quite yet, but it would be a hell of an introduction for a rookie, and one which would make it clear he was going to be a force to be reckoned with in the future. And when it came to 2006, sheer size would also be a major factor in why the best debut of that year came out of the gate so strong. That's right, it's time for us to talk about the Great Khali. Now, he might not be considered amongst the best world champions in WWE history today, But when he debuted in WWE in 2006, the Great Khali felt like someone who was going to be a major player for some time to come. And the reason for this was because, at a legit 7'1" in height, he towered over the rest of the roster, with him even being bigger than giants like Kane and The Big Show. So, as you would expect then, as soon as Vince McMahon laid eyes on the Indian, he saw money in him. Money which he would set about drawing by having the big man be a focus of the SmackDown brand. Yes, immediately upon arrival, Khali made it known he wasn't here to play when he absolutely destroyed The Undertaker. And this set him down a path which would eventually lead towards that prized World Heavyweight title in 2007. But he wasn't a newcomer anymore by then. No, the role of best newcomer in WWE who had the best debut of this year would by that point have moved on to someone who was less about power and more about comedy, Santino Marella. Of course, we should clarify here though, while Santino would go on to become one of WWE's premier comedy characters, that wouldn't be the way he was presented on night one. No, on night one, during one of the rare episodes of Raw to air from Milan, Italy, he'd play the role of a fan in the crowd who got a chance to challenge then Intercontinental Champion Umaga. Obviously then, this was all designed to make it seem like, when Marella beat the champ, it was a huge upset and a big moment for a local guy, even if, in truth, the man behind the character was a Canadian. And that moment would set Santino down a path of being one of the mainstays of WWE during the PG era to come. Really, when you think about this time period, he's one of the first people who might come to mind, but he's probably not the first. No, the first might very well be our choice for the best debut of 2008, CM Punk. Now, we know that CM Punk had been wrestling in WWE prior to this, but for the purposes of today's video, we're considering his true debut, his main roster one if you will, to have come in 2008, as that was when he left the dreaded WWE CW brand behind. And what an early splash he made here, as it would be at WrestleMania 24 that he won the Money in the Bank contract and booked himself a world title shot at any time of his choosing over the 12-month period which followed. Would he have cashed in his contract by the time the year was out? Yes, he would have. And not just that, he would have won one of the two top prizes in WWE in the form of SmackDown's World Heavyweight title. So even if he would reach higher highs, to call this debut anything less than a blow-away success for the Second City Saint would be a lie, as it was the point he first put his name on the map of the main roster. And a similar situation would be playing itself out in 2009 with a future rival of Punk's, as that would be the year in which Drew McIntyre officially arrived. No, this was not Drew McIntyre as fans have come to know him today. A top-tier promo and former world champion. Hell, back in 2009, the Scotsman was still very much a rookie. But right away, upon arriving on the Blue brand, it was clear there were big things in his future, and this is why Vince McMahon gave him his personal seal of approval straight away by labeling him as the Chosen One. Sure, you could argue the pressure of being given such a moniker may have been too much for Drew to handle back then, and that it led to him faltering for a few years yet, but none of this was evident during his initial months on the roster. No, all that was evident then was that he was a big Celtic badass who was not going to stop until he reached the top of the mountain, as that this would be very exciting to play out. By the time we reached 2010, however, it would no longer be one person who served as the best debut in WWE. Rather, it would be a whole group, a group known as the Nexus. Now we know that, as the months went on, the Nexus would not reach the heights most people hoped they would, with this largely being a result of bad booking and a complete on-screen burial from John Cena. But on night one, there was nothing in WWE that felt hotter, as this was the night the group of NXT rookies made up of Wade Barrett, Daniel Bryan, Skip Sheffield, Heath Slater, Darren Young, Michael Tarver, and Justin Gabriel all laid absolute waste to Monday Night Raw. Seriously, for a moment there, this truly felt like the second coming of the NWO, and for that reason alone, the Nexus's debut can't be considered anything less than a high point for 2010 WWE, and a sign they were intent on kicking off the new decade with a bang. Could the same excitement be applied to our best debut of 2011, however? Well, yes and no. The man then known as Sin Cara. Now, if you're a fan of lucha wrestling, or just wrestling in general, then you'll probably be all too aware that in 2025, Mystico is one of the best and biggest drawing wrestlers in the world, with it largely being him who has caused CMLL to undergo a boom period in recent years. But it's not just as recently as this that he's been great. No, he's been a stellar performer all the way since the late 2000s and early 2010s. So when he signed on the dotted line with WWE in 2011 then, and was from there quickly rebranded as Sin Cara, it got a lot of people excited to see how he would fare inside of a WWE ring. And while sure, his run in Vince McMahon's promotion might not have gone so well in the long run, during those early weeks at least, there was a sense that this was a guy who had something special as he instantly caught fans' eyes with his acrobatic style. Come 2012, however, it would be less about acrobatics and more about guerrilla warfare, as our best debut of then would be The Shield. No, they might not have been around for the vast majority of 2012, with them only debuting on the main roster during November's Survivor Series pay-per-view, but the trio made up of Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins didn't need months in which to make an impact. Hell, with their style of working as such a well-oiled unit, no one could even come close to getting the better of them. They were already established as a top act by the time December was coming to a close. Needless to say then, when we're talking about great debuts which would have a huge impact on the wrestling industry going forward, the Shields has to be right up there amongst the best ever, as, today, they all still dominate a brand of their own. And none of that would have happened had they not made such a splash in 2012, just as the rise of our next trio would have never reached the same heights had they not hit a home run so quickly out of the box in 2013. Who are we talking about here? Why, the Wyatt family, of course. Yes, there was more than one major stable in WWE during the early to mid-2010s, and while the Shield have probably gone on to become the one which has had the biggest historical impact, that's no shade on the one led by Bray Wyatt. Why is that? Well, when the Wyatt family first arrived on Raw back in 2013, they were instantly captivating to fans, as even if they were heels, something about their backwoods Bayou cult characters made for engrossing TV each time they were on screen. And that was especially true of the group's leader, someone who would go on to become a major single star himself as the years progressed. Back at this point, however, he was happy to work alongside his minions, as they pretty quickly set their sights on taking out an established legend like Kane just in time for that year's SummerSlam. Would the Wyatts be standing tall at the end of SummerSlam? Of course they would, just as they would continue to do so well into 2014. That said, come 2014, they'd no longer be the best WWE debut of the year. No, that honor would instead have moved over to our next subject, Sting. That's right, after years of being the lone remaining holdout from WCW who never went to WWE, it would be at the Survivor Series in 2014 that Sting finally made his debut inside of a Vince McMahon-owned ring. Obviously then, this was a huge moment for fans of his, as the sight of him standing face-to-face with someone like Triple H was a truly surreal sight to see. Really, this was one of those genuine hell freezing over moments, and it made for quite a scene inside of the Scott Trade Center that night. Where would Sting's WWE run take him from there? Well, while it wouldn't quite go the way audiences had hoped post-Survivor Series, this is another example of a botched run after the fact not being able to take away from the power of the initial debut. No, that moment remains just as strong as ever, as it was something no one thought they'd ever see by then. And in some ways, the same could be said about our choice for best WWE debut of 2015 too, the one involving Kevin Owens. Why do we say the WWE debut of Kevin Owens in 2015 was something many people thought they'd never see? Well, because even post CM Punk and Daniel Bryan opening the door for more indie guys in WWE, there was a sense that Vince McMahon would never take to KO, as he just didn't have the body type the boss was looking for. But after making such an incredible splash down in NXT during the prior year, it quickly became clear that Owens was going to be undeniable once his main roster moment arrived. And that would prove to be an accurate assessment of things when this moment finally came, as after laying out John Cena on night one, KO would go on to beat Big Match John clean in the middle of the ring during his first match as part of the main roster, with this proving to any of his doubters that he absolutely had it. Honestly, it's hard to think of a better debut than this one from the 2010s, so impactful it was. Really, one of the only possibilities for topping it would be our choice for the best WWE debut of 2016, and that's only because this was the debut of one of the best wrestlers in the world, the phenomenal one himself, AJ Styles. Come on now, when it was announced in early 2016 that 4 prominent members of the New Japan Pro Wrestling roster, and AJ Styles, Shinsuke Nakamura, and the Good Brothers were jumping ship to WWE, it got a lot of people excited. As for the former two at least, this would be their first time inside of a WWE ring. That said, there were some concerns that in the case of the phenomenal one, Vince McMahon wouldn't get him, and that as a result, he would end up faltering. But in the end, all of those concerns turned out to be unfounded, as following an incredible debut at the Royal Rumble in January, AJ had a stellar first year, one which saw him become WWE champion by the time the autumn came around. Yes, it all went better than even the most optimistic person could have dared imagine, and for that reason, he has to be our choice for the best debut of 2016. But what of 2017? Well, that year it would be another former TNA star who arrived on the main roster with a bang, as that year would feature the Raw debut of Samoa Joe. That's right. After being a key part of not just TNA, but also Ring of Honor throughout the 2000s and well into the 2010s, Samoa Joe had long since established himself as one of the best wrestlers in the world come 2017. And this was a legacy he'd only added to during the couple of years prior when he joined the NXT roster and there became a 3-time world champion before all was said and done. One thing he was yet to do as this new year dawned, however, was appear on the WWE main roster. But that would all change when he finally arrived on Raw during the lead-up to WrestleMania 33. And boy did he make an impact here, as it would be Joe who got to lay out Seth Rollins on night one, all before then spending the rest of the year going on a warpath throughout the men's division. No, he'd never win the WWE title as AJ Styles had done the year before, but he would make it clear to anyone who didn't already know who he was that he was one of the baddest men to ever lace up a pair of boots. That said, when compared to the baddest woman to ever lace up a pair of boots, even Samoa Joe might cower in fear, as that woman is none other than our best WWE debut of 2018, Ronda Rousey. Of course, it should be obvious that we were going to go with Ronda Rousey here, as her arrival at the end of the 2018 Women's Royal Rumble match marked a major turning point for the division, so much so that only a year later, the ladies would be main eventing WrestleMania. And her aptitude for the ring was on full display during her debut bout where she teamed up with Kurt Angle to take on Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, just as it was when she became Raw Women's Champion as the summer came around. Basically, what we're saying here is that this was an all-timer of a rookie year, and it meant the woman who would serve as the best debut of 2019 would have a lot to live up to. Would she do this? Well, let's find out by looking at her right now, Lacey Evans. Now, on the face of things, it might seem strange to say that. Of all the people on WWE, Lacey Evans was the one who made the biggest splash as a rookie act in 2019. But when you think about it, it really is true. After all, following a short run down in NXT, it was here that she arrived on the main roster and quickly set her sights on going after then undisputed women's champion Becky Lynch. No, she wouldn't win either of Becky's belts here, but Lacey would get a few big pay-per-view matches out of the whole situation, including one mixed tag match main event. So really, it was nothing less than a major win for her in terms of establishing herself to a new audience. But unfortunately for the lady of WWE, come 2020, any momentum she had would have well and truly been swallowed up, as another main roster debut became the new big thing. Who are we talking about here? Who else but Rhea Ripley? That's right, while her full-blown call-up might have happened in 2021, it was in 2020 that the Eradicator first arrived on Raw, as it was here she found herself being challenged by main roster star Charlotte Flair. Why was Charlotte Flair going after Rhea? Well, because she'd won the Women's Royal Rumble and chosen to cash in her guaranteed world title match against the NXT Women's Champion. Needless to say then, this was a big moment for Ripley and for the NXT brand in general, as it saw the Australian defend her gold at WrestleMania 36. Sure, she'd lose the belt here, and would return to the black and gold brand for a while as a result, but it was still a major stepping stone in her career as it allowed main roster audiences to get a taste of her before she fully arrived the following year. And she wouldn't be the only Judgment Day member getting called up in 2021, as that year the best WWE debut would be none other than Damian Priest. Now, Damian Priest is someone that everyone could tell was talented back when he was down in NXT, but due to the fact he got his start in the ring relatively late in life, it led many to suspect that when he finally reached the main roster, he'd ultimately be lost in the shuffle as younger stars got pushed instead. Thankfully then, this was not the case, as after arriving on Raw in 2021, Priest didn't waste any time in entering into a WrestleMania program with Bad Bunny. And once that had established him, it would be on to even bigger and better things, as come the end of the year, he'd be United States Champion. A quick rise indeed for someone who had a lot going against him in theory, on account of the fact he wasn't exactly a spring chicken by then. Would that make him the most successful NXT call-up of the 2020s? Not quite, as a stronger case for that could be arguably made with our next entry, the best WWE debut of 2022, the one, the only, Gunther. Of course, most wrestling fans would have already been well aware of how great Gunther was prior to 2022, as whether it was his work on the European indie scene or his time in both NXT and NXT UK, he had absolutely dominated everyone he'd come up against with his savage in-ring style built largely around stiff chops and high-impact moves. That said, there were concerns that once he reached the main roster, Vince McMahon wouldn't know what to do with him. Thankfully then, not long after the Austrian arrived on SmackDown, the boss no longer had to be a concern for him, as it would be in the summer of 2022 that Triple H took over as the new head of creative. And with the game now booking Gunther, he was able to get a fantastic presentation, one which saw him continue to dominate as the man who would eventually go on to become the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time. Would the same level of success befall our choice for best WWE debut of 2023? Well, let's find out by looking at them now, the woman known as Jade Cargill. Yes, well, Jade Cargill technically made her on-screen debut for WWE in late 2022, as that was the point where following her AEW exit, she started showing up on all three brands, with the story being that each general manager was attempting to court her. But for the purposes of today's video, we're going to put her true debut as being 2023, as it was then that she formally agreed to join the main roster by having her first match there. How would this work out for the former TBS champion? Well, while there would be some early growing pains, her sheer physical presence alone was enough to make sure she remained on TV in a notable spot throughout her initial months. Yes, it was clear even this early on that WWE saw big things in Jade's future, and that was why she'd spend so much time here under the learning tree of more established acts like Naomi and Bianca Belair. But let's move away from 2023 for now and over to 2024 instead, as that year the biggest and best WWE main roster debut once again came from the men's division. That's right, it's time for us to talk about Bron Breakker. Come on now, there was no other option for us to go with here, because even if he had already given fans a taste of what he could do down on the NXT brand prior to this when he became a two-time world champion, it wasn't until Bron Breakker hit the main roster in 2024 that he fully felt like he'd arrived. And the reason for this was because it was here that he was thrown right into the deep end with some of the top acts in the company, and in the process of doing so, didn't look out of place at all. No, whether he was going up against Sami Zayn, Jey Uso, Sheamus, or anyone else, the son of Rick Steiner proved to be an absolute force of nature here, one who we could easily see becoming the face of the entire company in years to come. And if you need any evidence that WWE saw this same potential in him too, you just have to look at the fact he'd be Intercontinental Champion before the summer was over. But when it comes to 2025, well, it's time for us to move back over to the women's division again, because this year, the hottest main roster debut has been none other than Stephanie Vaquer. What has made Stephanie Vaquer's 2025 so special? Well, after quickly rising to the top of the pack in NXT during 2024, she'd waste no time in doing the same on Raw. And we say that because following some very impressive early performances in the weeks and months after WrestleMania 41, it would be in the autumn that Vaquer found herself winning the Women's World Heavyweight title. Yes, like with people such as Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar before her, it took Stephanie less than a year to rise all the way to the top, and this has meant there's no way we could go with anyone else for the best WWE debut of 2025. Where will the Chilean's future take her next? Well, that remains to be seen. Given the current trajectory she's on, we can only assume it'll be even more world titles. But one thing she won't be is the best debut of 2026 and beyond. No, that mantle will have to be taken up by more new acts who will continue to push WWE forward as the decade enters its second half, and fan demand for great introductions continues to remain strong.